So today, as you can see, I'm going to be talking about beauty and challenges. I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about Disney movies and how when you watch a lot of these older Disney movies when you're a child, they end with something along the lines of, and they lived happily ever after. Or if it doesn't say that explicitly, it's kind of implied, right? And I as a child, and even now as an adult, I still love a lot of those movies. But I also recognize kind of set us up for some problems, especially if you really buy into this idea of as long as you make it work at the beginning, it'll be great for the rest of your life, It doesn't work that way, especially once you get past the honeymoon phase and you start really learning about the other person, things you don't like about them, and you have kids, and you got to try to balance all these different things, and it can be challenging sometimes, and that is not necessarily talked about in the Disney movies. Not that it was their job to, but I think that we maybe need to be a little bit wiser when we're looking at these things. They are called fairy tales for a reason. The reality is that life has many ups and downs, and if we want life to be happy or good all the time, we will be very disappointed. And also we'll be very ill-equipped to deal with challenges when they do come. So learning how to navigate disappointments in life, letdowns, lows, times of discouragement is really such an important skill that we have to learn. And I think a skill that many people never learn. So as a parent and having children now, and watching those children get older and really trying to think about, what can I do to help them to be successful adults? I think many parents do. We think about how can we well prepare our kids? How can we give them a strong sense of who they are, core beliefs that will help them in their life? We hopefully help them to not make some of the mistakes that we made in life. They need to know that as hard as they may try to do something, things will not always go as planned. So how to deal with that? And learning how to deal with that, not when you're 30 or 40 or 50 years old, but when you're young and the consequences are small. In my experience, when I was young, I really I was in Boy Scouts, and I really hated it. I didn't like the people. I had a really hard time with all the requirements to be able to get the badges. And I had a really hard time just with the structure. And there was many things that I really struggled with. And so at one point, I remember driving home and I just told my mom or my dad, I just want to quit Boy Scouts. And they said, okay. And at that time, it was kind of a relief because I didn't have to deal with that anymore. I didn't have to go, I didn't have to see those people. I didn't have to do the things that you have to do, learning how to walk a certain way and everything, the Scout Pledge and all that stuff. But actually inside, I really liked it, but I don't know. I was just in a place where it just wasn't working for me. But as 20 plus years later, I've actually been thinking about how I really regret quitting Boy Scouts. Not because I wish that I had the Eagle Scout title and the perks that it might get me, which I don't even know what that would be these days, especially in my job, right? But it was something that I had worked hard on. I had gone through being a Cub Scout, right? And I had done the Pinewood Derby. I don't know if you guys know this. You make the little wooden cars and you race with other people. And I have nice memories with my dad making those cars and trying to figure out how to get them to go faster than everyone else's car. And we had sleepovers and we had campouts, and I remember one year we went into the mountains in the middle of winter and we had to dig out the snow. We had to set up a huge canvas tent, and it was freezing, and it was honestly, I made me never want to go camping again. But these are good memories in a way, because I worked, I invested into it, I worked hard for it, at least in my memory. They probably might feel otherwise if I asked them. But I wish that I had followed through until the end. I wish that I had not given up and had overcome my dislike of the people and whatever kind of feelings I had that I was discouraged about doing Boy Scouts. And I wish that I had finished, is what I'm saying in a long roundabout way. And actually, I realized that even now, I still have this kind of a challenge to really feel confident that if I were to start something, that I can see it through to the end. Probably not just because of that one experience, but maybe, that was a part of it too. Because I do think it's important to, when you start something, you see it through to the end, but it's not easy to do that, because you're always going to hit a point where you're like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. I don't know if I like this. It's a long commitment. Boy Scouts is a few years, right? It's more than a few years. It's like 10 years. But, marriage and having a family and building a successful career and our life of faith with God is not just like a thing we commit to for a couple years. These are lifelong commitments. And it's inevitable that somewhere along the way, there's going to be something that's going to happen to you that's going to really discourage you, that's going to really set you back, that's really going to make you feel, I don't know if this is worth it. So how to navigate those, because I think that giving up is always an option. We always have a choice, but is that really what we want? Is that really what's going to lead to lifelong happiness and fulfillment? That's really the question. So even though it was a relief at the time that I quit, I regret it now. It was a short-term relief, but a long-term loss. There's a beauty in pushing through to finish something that you started, and there's beauty in overcoming a challenging situation. We gain confidence to do it again, and that even if things don't go the way that we want or planned, it doesn't mean that something can't be gained or learned from it. So these are things that we experience in our daily life. Maybe you have some experience that you can kind of think back on. But when we also, as people of faith, people who believe in God, it's that aspect of overcoming challenges takes on a whole nother dynamic. Because when we look at God's providence throughout all of history, I think it's safe to say that there have been more downs than there have been ups. And even the victories are bittersweet and hard-won. I have this quote that I want to share from our founder, Reverend Moon. He said, "We have to feel the sorrowful heart of God. He had to watch Jesus dying on the cross after striving to fulfill his mission with such intense devotion and dedication. Jesus came for the sake of humankind and the universe. He came to dissolve God's sorrow, complete God's will, and subjugate Satan. But disbelievers hounded Jesus from one corner to another, and in the end, he had to carry the cross on Golgotha. Can you imagine Jesus' heart at that time? Yet even when he understood that God's promise and desire, of which he was the center, would be shattered and his life would end on the cross, Jesus did not betray God. He remained loyal and devoted to God to the end. No one believed in Jesus, but he paid no heed to this. He kept moving forward, bonded to heaven and on the path toward his life goal. Ultimately, Jesus' historic life became the path of hope for humankind." So, something that I have always found to be very insightful or very unique about our teaching in the divine principle is this concept of that God's providence didn't just happen haphazardly. It didn't just happen like, okay, well, this family did this, and then that family did that, and this person did this, and then Jesus came, and it's all kind of seems like it just kind of all happened, and it's told in a story. But actually, on a deeper inspection of the Bible, we see that actually God was working through periods of time. God was working through people's victories, people's overcoming, or people's failures to advance or set back his timetable, and that things happened for a reason. And that God also oftentimes had to use the victories of righteous people who were often treated unfairly for doing the right thing, for doing nothing wrong. We find ourselves many times dealing with unfair situations in our life. But the ultimate being that has been treated unfairly in this world is God. How many times is God blamed for the problems in our lives or the problems of humanity? And people curse God unfairly. But it's not in God's nature to strike first or to retaliate or even to try to avoid somebody's mistake. God always believes, God always hopes for the best, and God is always optimistic about you and I. In Matthew, Jesus shares a parable of the workers in the vineyard. And in the parable, if you know it, there's a landowner. And the landowner is hiring some workers for his field. And so he goes out early in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. And there's workers, apparently, who are ready to work at 5 o'clock in the morning. So he goes to them and he says, "Work at my farm, I will pay you 1 denarius if you work all day." And so he gets a bunch of people. And then he goes out again at 9 o'clock in the morning and he gets a bunch more people and tells them the same thing. And he goes out at noon, and he goes out at 3, and he goes out at 5. And every time he goes out, he says the same thing. "Come work for me, I need workers, I'll pay you 1 denarius. So everyone is working, and then the end of the day comes, and he's going to pay everybody. And this is where I'll pick up from the Bible, from Matthew. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." I think this is kind of funny. Obviously, this is a parable. This is a story. Probably never happened. But I think it's very interesting that Jesus is saying that to call them all together and list them from the people who came last first. So if you know the story, right, the owner pays everybody the same amount of money, just like he promised. But the people who were at the back of the line, who had been there all day, were expecting that since they were there all day, and the people who'd only been working since 5 got paid a denarius, surely that they would get paid more money. It just makes sense, right? And obviously, why do that? Why gather everybody publicly, right? If you wanted to avoid causing a conflict, then you would do it privately. Like, "I'm going to pay you a denarius, but don't tell the people who've been here since 5 in the morning, okay? Because they've been here 12 hours longer than you." So if you didn't want to cause any upset or frustration or fighting, then you would probably do it that way. But no, it was done publicly. And not only publicly, the people who came last received their money first. So it was very obvious that everybody got the same regardless of how long they had been there. So anyway, moving on. The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. They're pretty pissed. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, your friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first and the first will be last. It's a really beautiful story in a lot of ways, because I think that really Jesus is trying to express to us the heart of God. That even if you have been following God's path all your life and have made many sacrifices, God still loves you. God's still going to give you what he promised to you, but he's also going to extend the same courtesy to a person who just squeaked in the door at the last minute. Because God doesn't quantify love and blessing by our standards of how much we gave. He treats us all the same. So that's a little bit tough to digest if you're the worker that's been not the best word, but slaving away, all day long. But it's also very interesting how similar this is to the story of Lucifer in the story of Eden, in the Garden of Eden of Adam and Eve, where also Lucifer could not overcome his feeling of being treated unfairly because he had worked so hard. He deserved special treatment. That's what the people are saying. So we have to be careful. It's not the point of the sermon, but we have to be careful too. Maybe you feel like you gave so much for God, but it doesn't mean that we can expect that God is going to give us special treatment. And we have to extend the same heart of grace that God would give to somebody who, maybe they kicked God out of their life and they came back. But in many ways, we don't even recognize that we are so much like the workers who came in at the last minute. We are. We may not feel that way in our life. We may feel like, my life has so many problems and I'm a terrible person and so many things. But compared to all the people of the past, we really, we compare ourselves to the people of the Old Testament, the people of history, even just from a purely external point of view. We have so much blessing. We have air conditioning. We have cars. We have access to good food all the time. Yes, there's always things to complain about. I feel like I'm being punched in the stomach every time I fill up my gas tank. But there's always challenges. But I also believe that when we look at all of history and all the people that have come before us and all our ancestors and all the people who made incredible sacrifices for us to be here, we are in many ways those people who showed up at 5 o'clock just in time to ring out and collect. Not that we're here to collect or anything, but we're blessed is all I'm trying to say. May not feel it, but we are blessed in a lot of ways from that larger perspective. And as Paul wrote in Romans, we too wait with eager hope for the day when God will give us our full rights as his adopted children, including the new bodies he has promised us. Well, Paul wrote this 2,000 years ago. He's saying we're hoping for that day to come, when we are basically given a full rebirth and fully embraced into God's family. Here's another excerpt from a quote from our founder. He said, "The way for good people to go is to be struck first and then to claim what is lost. This is why good people are always struck first. After they are struck, over the course of time, something develops. That is the way of heaven and earth. It happens because good people keep investing." So even though we feel things may be unfair sometimes, we have to remember that that's always been God's way. Like I said, God doesn't attack. God doesn't strike first. God always believes, but then when his people are struck, are persecuted, or are treated unfairly for trying to do the right thing, then that is God's opportunity to claim something. That is the example of Jesus Christ, right? Jesus, like we read before, gave everything of his full devotion for his mission, never betrayed God, never backed out of what he was doing. And it was because of that and who Jesus was that when he went to the cross, that God could claim salvation for humankind, that by connecting with Jesus, we can receive the spiritual salvation. But it's the same principle that applies to our life too. If we feel like we're being treated unfairly for some reason, and we complain to God, and we become bitter about it, and we whatever, then there's not going to be a lot for God to claim there. But if we have the same perspective as Jesus, and we, even though we may ask, like Jesus asked, please let this cup pass from my hands. But whatever does happen, we accept with a grateful heart, with humility, with gratitude. Then that is something that God can claim, and also God, I believe, will work more fully and more deeply in our lives. We have to remember that even if life feels unfair, we have the same principles, divine principles that God has been restoring the world with thousands of years up until now are still in effect in our lives today. Here's another quote. God is struck first and then claims what is his. You should be the same. Because of us, God has had to endure the miserable course of the providence. We need to understand God's heart in history, always wanting to say to us, I want to talk to you. I want to work with you. God does not forget us. He waits for us. So we have to think to ourselves, God, when can I participate in your providence of restoration? We have to find the platform upon which we can live together with God. We have to find the way to think like God, speak like God, and act like God. In leading the providence of recreation, God takes an altruistic stance. He acts for the sake of others again and again and follows the strategy of being struck first and then taking back what is his. On the other hand, Satan takes a self-centered stance and strikes first, but later he must pay compensation for the damage. God's strategy is to be struck first and later to claim damages. Satan always strikes first, but comes to ruin later. In this way, the good side advances by being struck first, receiving persecution and making sacrifices, while Satan's side does the opposite. So, I don't think that God enjoys seeing us deal with difficulties. My kids have been doing Taekwondo for a few years. It's been like 5 years now. And there's been times where they've wanted to quit because they got kind of tired of it, or it's like it's hard work, it's a big commitment. And kind of like with the Boy Scouts, there was a part of me that was like, well, if they want to quit, then maybe they should just quit, right? But thankfully my wife has a little bit of a different perspective, and I'm learning a lot from her as life goes on. I feel like a lot of my lessons I learned from her, actually. And she was really explaining to me that she really wants the kids to have this experience of finishing, of getting to the black belt. And I was like, okay, I get it. So, we sat down with our kids and we're like, we know that you want to quit, but we feel like it would be so great for you if you could get to black belt. And we had a conversation with them, and they were kind of explaining the things that they struggled with. So we had a meeting with the martial arts instructor, and kind of they could express some of the things they were getting tired of, and he could come up with creative ways to find ways to make it a little bit more interesting for them. And then they got past the lull. I think we had 2 lulls, 2 points where they kind of like, I don't know if I want to finish. And then just this year, they're getting close to getting their black belts, and we said, hey, so we have to renew your martial arts membership. Do you want to just renew until December when you get your black belt, or do you want to keep going? And they said, well, the boys said they wanted to keep going. So I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like, you went from not wanting to do it anymore at all to not only finishing, but also continuing. And that was really kind of heartwarming for me, because Mia didn't want to continue, but I do think it's important. Like, as parents, we see that we are only able to provide so much for our kids. We have our shortcomings, we have our challenges, but as parents, we have to look for ways that we can fill in where we are lacking. And so being able to have this kind of a martial arts community, and also this church community, is something that, when we were thinking about the direction we wanted to go in our life, one of the big options would have been to stay in Missouri on the farm with the grandparents. They would have loved that. The grandparents would have loved that. But coming here and seeing what being a part of this community has done for our kids, I know that we couldn't have provided that for them out there. So I feel immense amount of gratitude for that. But as parents, we have to see, like, what am I not able to, what are my kids going to need to be able to be functional, healthy, successful adults who can make successful families and who can live a fulfilling life. And then figure out, if I can't provide that for them, how can I find the thing that will help? That's our responsibility as parents. But that also means that sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes we have to allow our kids or one another or ourselves to go through some kind of challenges. I think God also has to look at us sometimes and see us going through challenges. I don't think God enjoys that. I don't think God wants that. But I do think that sometimes God sees our life from a different perspective. He knows the challenges that we're going to go through. He knows the obstacles that are going to be in our path. He knows our shortcomings. Many times we don't even see our shortcomings until they're literally staring us in the face, and it's so hard to deal with it then. So I do think that God, as a loving parent, sends us situations to overcome. And I think that he especially will do that if we're praying and we're really trying to seek for God's will in our life. And maybe you're praying, that God will work in your life in some way, or God can heal some pain in your life, or your family maybe has some major challenge, or there's a health issue or a financial, we deal with so many different things, right? But God can't just unconditionally give us his blessings without some condition on our part, some effort on our part. That's why the Bible says, knock and seek and you will find. Knock and the answer will be given to you. It doesn't just say that God will just give you all the answers that you ever wonder about. It doesn't work that way. But unfortunately, we run into difficult situations in our life, and sometimes we complain. And sometimes we become bitter and resentful. Like, why do I have to deal with this situation? But maybe God is looking down at us and being like, well, you kind of asked for it. Like when you asked me to give you wisdom, or when you asked me to give you a bigger heart, or when you asked me to help heal my family, maybe you need to grow as a parent or something like that. We don't know. But I think it makes God very heartbroken when he gives us something to grow from or to overcome, and we resent him for it. Maybe God is trying to help us to learn a lesson. Maybe we are trying to restore some past mistake, or maybe God wants to melt someone's resentment through you. Someone once told me that when you have unfair situations in life, you have two options. You can become bitter, or you can become better. It's a good saying. It's really stuck with me. But becoming bitter requires blame, and blame is not God's way. So, we can go that way, but it's kind of like a fork in the path. I don't know, for people of God, I have seen a lot of situations, and I've been in a lot of situations. I know how easy it can to become bitter about something, but I think that we have to ask ourselves some honest questions about that. Have you ever met a bitter person that was a loving person? Have you ever met a bitter person that was a good listener? Have you ever met a bitter person that was genuinely living for other people? Have you ever met a bitter person that seemed happy or fulfilled? So God's way is the opposite. God's way is to take responsibility, to overcome challenges with patience and gratitude and compassion, knowing that his blessing may be just right around the corner. So please consider how you deal with challenges in your life. Are you choosing God's way, or are you choosing the other way? If you find yourself thinking that maybe your life would be better with certain people not in it, or you can't go forward or be successful because you're being held back by others, you may need to look at that way of thinking. That may not come from God. Think about yourself. Maybe we're lashing out sometimes. We need to be aware of when we may be doing damage to other people or damaging somebody else to get ahead, to promote our agenda or our benefit. So lastly, I want to share a quote from our founder, last one to finish, and thank you so much for your patience. I know this has been a little bit of a long message. We have inner and outer struggles. You must win the inner struggle. Whenever there are enemies coming against you, you must be able to win over them by being patient and serving them. Again, I must say that the secret of Jesus' success in God's sight is that he was ever patient and he was sacrificial for humanity. Even praying in Gethsemane, Jesus said, "If it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but not as I will, but as thou wilt." That's the point. If he kept saying, "Let this cup pass from me, I will not receive this cup, I will have nothing to do with it," he could have been a failure. But his idea was, not as I will, but as God wills. That's what makes Jesus a sacred person. Even at the moment of death, he blessed his enemy. Be ready to utilize the moment of difficulty to train yourself to win over evil. There are two secrets. One, be patient, and the other, be sacrificial in service to others. With those two ingredients, you will be a success. Unhappy and miserable things are not necessarily going to lead you to unhappiness and misery. If you turn them the other way around, you can bring victory and happiness. Please join me in prayer. Good morning. Heavenly Parent, we just humbled to be able to come together this morning, knowing even a little bit the challenges that you have had to endure to see your children go through so many difficulties and hardships in life, Heavenly Parent, knowing that you couldn't just reach in and fix everything for us. But we know that you are a loving parent, and that the path that you've set us on and the path that we're going, as long as we are trying our best to be sincere, will eventually lead us in the right way. And even if we have to learn some hard lessons along the way, Heavenly Parent, we want to stick with you, Heavenly Parent, even during the times of challenge and difficulty, and even we don't understand maybe what you're trying to do in our lives sometimes. But we know that you are a loving God. We know that you have a will, you have a plan for this world. And even if things are difficult, Heavenly Parent, I just pray that we don't get discouraged, that we don't lose hope, that we can remind ourselves always that things have never been easy. Things have never been all good. There's always been downs, and there's been a few ups, Heavenly Parent, and even the victories have been hard won. And we are so blessed that we can live at a time where we can enjoy a lot of benefits of this world and of history. And I just pray, Heavenly Parent, that we can live our life in such a way that we can make you proud and inspire you and really live up to the sacrifices of the many people who came before us, and just always be grateful, even in the times where we don't want to be grateful, where we feel we've been treated unfairly. Always be grateful. I pray, please give us the strength and the fortitude to do that. And I thank you, Heavenly Parent, because we know that you're always supporting us, even when we don't see you. And I offer this prayer in my name, Michael Adonia Hendrick, a blessed Central family. Amen and adieu. Thank you so much.